So briefly, I just want to say who this amazing doctor is. I work with him in Plainview. He also works in a couple other Northwell hospitals, Manhasset. He goes all over. I usually work like a week out of the month. His name is Dr. Mina. You can call him Dr. Mina. And he's just so knowledgeable about this subject. He's a pulmonologist. He's a critical care intensivist, a critical care doctor, and he treats people with these lung conditions after they've had this issue with vaping and done damage to the lungs. So, Dr. Mina, you can call him that.
Mina is fine.
And please give him your full attention, just so you can listen to what he's going to tell you guys about.
Thank you, Karen. How you all doing?
Good.
You guys all excited tonight? Yeah. Good. I gotta say, I admire, this is very encouraging to see this nice fellowship together. I'm Christian as well, and I believe, and I'm happy that we got this, you guys got a good group here of fellowship to praise together, to become friends together, to grow up together. It's really beautiful. I'm not tech savvy, but I'm gonna see, apparently if I click on, okay. So I want to talk to you guys about vaping today, and just as Carol said, I'm a lung doctor. I'm also an ICU doctor. So about half my time I'm dealing with patients in ICUs, patients on, everybody knows now what ventilators are after COVID, so we deal with people on ventilators, people that have chronic lung disease, etc. And as a lung doctor, it's kind of like my second hat. I see people in the office that have chronic lung disease, smokers, emphysema, asthmatics, and then more recently in the last 5 to 10 years, we've been dealing with this issue of vaping. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about it. I think the most important thing that you can take home from today is, if you are doing this, it's okay. There are resources to help us get off it. If you're not doing it, I think it's important for you guys to know what the harms are, so that you can know why you shouldn't start it, because it can become very addictive. And if you're not doing it, and you know somebody who is, you can maybe get some resources how you can help those people if you want to, watch out for them as you're all brothers and sisters together, right? All right. So, what are e-cigarettes? We're going to talk about a bunch of topics today. What do you know about e-cigarettes and vaping? What is vaping or e-cigarettes? What are the different names of these products, and what are the main differences between them? What do they look like? Who is using these products? Why is vaping so popular? Vaping and the new subculture, dangers of vaping versus regular cigarettes. Then we're going to talk very briefly about this concept of addiction, dependence, and the gateway theory. And then we'll briefly mention the new vaping crisis, which started about 2 years ago. If you guys heard about people vaping marijuana, we saw a bunch of them in our ICUs everywhere. And then lastly, we'll just put references here for how to help to quit. But I will give my email to Steve and Carol, and they will be able to reach me if anybody needs any help or has any questions, okay? So e-cigarettes are known by many different names. They're known as e-cigs, e-hookahs, mods, vape pens, vapes, tank systems. We like to call them electronic nicotine delivery systems, but you guys don't call them that, right? Because that's what we like to call them. Some look like regular cigarettes, some look like cigars or pipes, some look like pens, some look like USB sticks. You can hide them, people don't know you're carrying them, right? So that's why they've become very popular. Right? There's many different types of these. So these are kind of just examples. There's more than 400, even 500 grams available of these e-cigarettes. So how do they work? First, there's a little battery. It heats up a liquid. So the first chamber is the electric coils, or the heating chamber. The second chamber is the liquid. And then the third part is the mouthpiece, where you put it onto the mouth, right? So a liquid is heated. This e-liquid contains what most e-cigarettes, especially the ones that are legal, are the ones that contain nicotine, which is the addictive drug. But they also have other chemicals, oils, metals, and flavors that help make the aerosol spray that you see people, they do their cloud chasing and their vaping competitions, right? So the person who's using these vape devices, they inhale this aerosol into their lungs. And what I was just talking to Carol outside about is, I think it's amazing that you ever see people exhale a vape, you see the vape smoke, right? That's only a fraction of what's entered into your lungs, right? So that's only, what you're inhaling is more than what you see them exhaling, right? Bystanders can also breathe this in the aerosol when the user exhales into the air, so kind of like secondhand smoke, secondhand vape, a similar concept. And the e-cigarettes can be used to deliver other drugs such as marijuana, So when you see THC on my screen, that's marijuana, that's tetrahydrocannabinol, that's the same thing as marijuana, or CBD is cannabinoid. And the last part, which is the scariest part, is that e-cigarettes are not regulated, right? So cigarettes are regulated. E-cigarettes are not FDA regulated, which means you can never be sure what they contain, and as we're figuring out over the last several years, they can be very harmful. So you guys I'm sure are aware of this, but they come in many different shapes and sizes. There's large tank devices, there's medium size, there's rechargeable e-cigarettes. The most common ones are called Juuls. I'm sure many of you guys have heard of them or seen them. They're these little USB sticks that you can even put in your pocket or carry with you, and they become very addictive, and people who use them need to have them on their person all the time, right? We talked about this already. The heating chamber, I don't know if this can point. Can this point? It doesn't point, oh, sorry. So there's the heating chamber with a battery, then there's the liquid chamber, and then there's a mouthpiece at the end of it, okay? Sorry. So what is in the e-cigarette? We talked about nicotine. There's volatile organic compounds. So there's, for example, in these e-liquids, there's something called benzene, which you guys may know benzene is in car exhaust. There's other ultrafine particles. There's heavy metals, right, close to where the battery heats the liquid. And then there's flavors. So whenever you see Juuls, for example, it doesn't come in plain flavor. It comes in mint flavor. I don't know what else, strawberry flavor, mango flavor, right? There's all these different types of flavors. And those flavors are additives. And one of the compounds is called diacetyl. It's actually been shown in the past, it's been linked to popcorn lung, something called popcorn lung, where the airways dilate and the lungs almost burst, okay? So a lot of different chemicals in it. I'm gonna share a story here. I shared this slide for a reason. This is from the CDC website. But one time I was at the beach, and next to me was a guy who had a larger tank device. He was vaping, but he had his hand. He was in a little cast from his thumb and his first two fingers. He was in a little cast, but he was still vaping. And so I went to him. I said, "Are you okay? Like, what happened there?" And he goes to me. He was charging his tank at home, his little vape whatever thing system. And when he was charging it and holding it, it actually exploded and he got a burn on his hand, which is not the only time. It's actually, if you look at the report here, I'm going to read the bottom line, this part right here. Another risk to consider involves defective e-cigarette batteries that have been known to cause fires and explosions, some of which have resulted in serious injuries. Most of the explosions happen when the e-cigarette batteries were being charged. So it's apparently happened many times, and it's one of the harms of it. So why are we worried about this? So in the last 5 to 10 years, we've seen an explosion in the amount of e-cigarette use especially among you guys, okay? So for example, in 2016 to 2017, there was the sales of Juuls, which is the most common. Now there's also something called Logic. Sales of these grew by more than 7-fold in that 1 year period. So to the point where people like the CDC, Centers for Disease Control, and a lot of the medical advertisements, they actually had to send notices to teachers, parents, etc. about what you guys are using, not because we don't trust you guys. We trust you guys. You guys are very responsible adults. As I heard, you made in the image of God. We want to protect our bodies. But sometimes when we're younger, and it's okay, you see friends using it, you see something that looks cool, you want to use it too. That's normal. That's how we are, and we have to have control. We're here to help you get control over the bodies. But what happens with these devices is that they become very addictive, and nicotine is very addictive in these e-cigarettes. And so because it's easy to hide, doesn't have a smell, it's very small, people may not catch you using it, it's very more easy to use than, for example, cigarettes when I was in high school 20 years ago, right? So these are much easier to use, and people were not aware of them. So a lot of advertisements went out to let parents, educators, healthcare providers know about them. So for example, these are advertisers saying that USB stick might be an e-cigarette, okay? So let's talk about who's using these products. The use of e-cigarette has grown exponentially. I'm gonna give you a little slide here. In 2011, less than 2 to 3% of high school and middle school students were using them. By 2015, you'll see that about almost 20% of high school students are using e-cigarettes. almost 20% of, that means 1 in 5 high school students, and this is 6 years ago, were using e-cigarettes. And even in middle school, more than 5% were using e-cigarettes. That's 7th and 8th graders, right? They're very young. You could see here, what are they using? E-cigarettes, cigarettes, or both? So you can see in 2011, before e-cigarettes were popular, most people are just using cigarettes. The dark blue is cigarettes. By 2018, you could see that the majority of people, 15% of high school students, are using e-cigarettes only, but up to, what is it, 15.1 plus 5.7, what is that? 20.6% are using e-cigarettes and regular cigarettes. 1 in 5 high school students using e-cigarettes and cigarettes, or both, or a mixture of either. And you could see how the use has been skyrocketing. One of the things that's scary, so when I see a smoker who's 60 or 5 or 7 years old trying to quit smoking, we used to say it's better to vape than to use cigarettes. And why is that? Because e-cigarettes or vape devices were initially designed to help people quit smoking, because smoking has a lot of chemicals that are dangerous. But the problem that became with e-cigarettes is that initially it was advertised as a way to quit smoking, but what happened over the course of the last 10, 15 years with e-cigarettes available is that people who never even smoked, who would never have started smoking, started using these e-cigarettes, which have nicotine, which can harm the brain and cause a lot of things that we're going to get to here. And that's why we got a little bit upset in the medical community, because we feel like it's affecting you guys in a way that you shouldn't have to be affected. Here's an alarming statistic that came out a few years ago when we started to get more involved in this project. Between 2017 to 2018, there was a 78% increase in the among high school students' use. It went from almost only 11 or 12% to more than 20%. And even in middle school students as well. I'm going to go to the next. I'm going to try to be a little bit more quick here. What else are people using? So the majority of people are using e-cigarettes now, 21%, but there's still cigarettes being used, cigars, smokeless tobacco, hookah, and pipe tobacco. But you can see how e-cigarettes have become the major thing to use. So why is vaping, why is using e-cigarettes so popular? I can ask you guys this question. You guys have heard, by the way, if I'm talking a different language, please stop me. But are you guys familiar with e-cigarettes? Vaping, you've seen it used. Why is it so popular, besides for what's on the screen? Yeah?
It's trendy.
It's trendy.
It's trendy.
All right, very good. That's true, it is trendy. What else? Yeah?
People think it looks cool.
It looks cool. Okay. What else?
You can do tricks.
You can do tricks with it. Like what?
I don't know.
Are you talking about like the smoke?
Yeah.
Yeah, of course. I was actually telling Caroline. Unfortunately, the unfortunate part about vaping is it looks cool. That's the unfortunate part. Like, you could do all these different designs in the clouds and stuff like that. Right? I think it's called, I heard you guys call it cloud chasing. Is that correct or not? But but what I was telling Carol, it's crazy that what's coming out is only a fraction of what goes into it. But yes, that's true. What else? Why else is it so popular? Yeah.
The flavors.
The flavors, yeah. I mean, I think if you're going to be having a mango flavored vape, I would like to have that.
Maybe the sensation. People think that they're going to get a good sensation.
All right. Yeah. They can give you a high in your lungs, I guess, when you vape it in. Yeah.
People like the look of the little,
Okay.
like the design of
The design of the different like tanks or.
yeah, instead of like a cigarette.
Okay. Yes, that's true. Anything else? A couple of other things that came up, for example, there's no odor. So people who smoke cigarettes, you can easily tell if somebody smokes cigarettes, right? With the e-cigarettes, you can't as much, right? There's no distinctive odor to them. They may be cheaper. You can recharge them, right? You don't have to throw it out. There are disposable ones. So there's many reasons why they've become very popular. A couple of ones here that we mentioned, people believe that vaping is less harmful than tobacco. It could be cheaper. People can vape in places where you can't smoke, right? So that people like that. The flavors we talked about, and their friends are using it, right? It's trendy, like Peter. We talked about this. Easy to obtain, not regulated, no restrictions, indoor use. This is the part that bothers me the most, and I've talked to you about it already. Most youth, high school e-cigarette users are never smokers. And even though e-cigarettes were intended to help smokers quit cigarettes, now they're actually being used by people who were never going to smoke at all. And that's the problem that's the thing that bothers me, is that it's affecting you guys, because what's in these are chemicals and drugs and things like nicotine that can really harm our developing brains. Because our brains keep developing, by the way. You guys know how old you are until your brains keep developing?
25.
Very good. You guys have practice here. You're doing a good job. Your brains keep developing until they're 25, right? So my brain stopped developing. So this is as smart as I'll ever be. I'm only going to become stupid over time, right? But you guys have a long ways to go, right? But what happens with nicotine? It primes the brain. It can cause a lot of different mood disorders and gateway into other drugs and things like that can prevent our brains from fully developing the way it should. That's the part that really bothers me the most. This is the other thing, and you may not know this, but the statistics have shown that youth who use e-cigarettes are more likely to go on and use regular cigarettes with higher risk for long-term tobacco smoke. So people, if you think you're only going to vape now and not smoke later, that's a lie. Because the statistics are showing if you're going to vape now, you're more likely going to smoke later. Then this is the scariest part, and this is the part that I think it also affected me, that these companies are targeting you guys. So I'm going to give you different advertisements. Who do you think this advertisement is targeting? Freedom to have a cigarette without the guilt. What about this one? Young lady here smoking, you can see the smoke coming out of her. You only exhale pleasant odor, right? Look at all these different advertisements. Love your lungs. Simple, refreshing, smoke-free. What about this one? If I see this commercial, I want whatever she's using, right? That's right? You agree? You agree with me, right? So you want whatever she's using, right? The advertisements are very strong. Look at this guy. Don't you want to be this guy? Thank you. Yeah, so the advertisements are trying to lure, who are they trying to lure? Our young people. They're not trying, don't tell me this advertisement's trying to lure my 65-year-old smoker who's on oxygen at home, right? He's not going to be out with two young ladies like this, smoking, vaping jewels, right? That's not who they're trying to get. They're trying to get you guys when you're young, right? I'm going to skip this. So look at this statistic. You guys ready for this? What has happened between 2011 to 2014 in the green here on the screen? Can anybody show me?
Increase.
Can anybody see it? Between 2011 to 2014, there's been an increase from $10 million to more than $120 million in advertisements for e-cigarettes. What do you think happened in that same time period from 2011 to 2014 in high school e-cigarette use? What?
It increased.
At the same rate, right? So don't think that advertisements will not affect it. Advertisements affect every one of us, right? Just look at the Super Bowl. Why do people watch the Super Bowl? Not because of the game? Advertisement, like the commercials, right? All right, I'm going to keep going because there's a lot we can talk about. All right, we talked about e-cigarette advertisements. They're attracting our low-risk youth that would never have started smoking. And the problem is that these can become gateway to traditional cigarettes, other drugs such as marijuana and cocaine. And the other thing is, high school students are more likely to use flavored e-cigarettes. And now, if you look at first-time e-cigarette users now, are most likely to try flavored e-cigarettes. Because you're not going to try something that's bland, you're going to want to try something that has a flavor, and those can probably be more toxic. And like I said, most youth that are trying e-cigarettes or using e-cigarettes now are not doing it to quit smoking, but they're doing it because it's now the popular thing to do, which is really not. If you look at, for example, the Juul website, it tells you that they're trying to do it to help people quit smoking, but that's what they write on the website. Unfortunately, the truth is different from that. All right, let's keep going. So there's many different flavors: honeydew, peach, guava. I can't see what else is in the blue over there. There's so many different flavors. The flavors are trying to lure you guys into trying these candy-flavored e-cigarettes and cigars, and many advertising themes. You see themes like freedom, they taste good, romance, sexuality, sociability, healthy, right? And then they come in so many different. Who is telling me that they look cool? Yes, you tell me, but they look cool, right? Like, doesn't this look cool? You carry that around, right? So they're trying to lure. There's so many ways to try to lure you guys into using these things. All right. And then, of course, the vaping competition, right? This is where you try to make the smoke, and you what's called cloud chasing, who can make a larger cloud, etc. Right? There's so many reasons that these can become so popular, and they can become very addictive, and they can become very habitual. All right, what are the harms of vaping? Anybody know what the harms of vaping are? Yeah.
Lung cancer.
Okay, so actually, you're probably right. Unfortunately, because they've only been out for like 10 to 15 years, we don't know, but there are cancer-causing chemicals in the vape product, so you're very right. Thank you. Yeah.
You use like the capability of your lungs goes down, it's harder to breathe, it's easier to cough and such.
Excellent. Actually, in the last, I would say 5 years since I've been practicing, I've had a lot more cases of young people have asthma who are using e-cigarettes. And what is asthma? You guys know what asthma is? I'm sure a lot of you guys have. Yes.
It's when it's hard to breathe when you're like doing activities like
Yes.
running, maybe even going up the stairs. It depends on how drastic your asthma is.
Very good. Yes. So asthma is a condition where your airways get inflamed, and instead of being nice and round and be able to get air in and out easy, they become very narrowed, inflamed, and you ever hear somebody wheezing? You guys know what wheezing is?
Yeah.
Where you're breathing through like a very narrow opening, so people have a harder time breathing. And what happens with the e-cigarettes, and some people who are more predisposed, their airways, instead of being nice and open, they can get very inflamed and they have a harder time breathing. So like we said, we don't know the long-term side effects. Like for example, when cigarettes first came out in the early 1900s, people didn't know what e-cigarettes can do. That's why a lot of our grandparents smoked, but they didn't know what the consequences of smoking would be. Until studies came out in the mid-1900s, and they found out that smoking is linked to COPD, is linked to lung cancer, is linked to heart disease, linked to peripheral vascular disease, linked to pancreatic cancer, bladder cancer, etc. Right? And then we're like, oh wait, these cigarettes are harmful. 50 years later, right? So that's why we're saying, why try something now that we don't know what the long-term side effects are? There's cancer-causing chemicals in vape. We've seen people develop asthma. Will they likely develop emphysema and COPD? Probably, but we haven't had them long enough to know. So yes, there are probably long-term side effects that we're not familiar with. We talked about the asthma, we talked about the carcinogens, and then the nicotine addiction is the part that we are most worried about for you guys. There's just some information, so if you know anybody who smokes Juuls, or vapes Juuls, one Juul pod, which can sometimes finish in less than half a day for people who vape regularly, is about a cigarette pack. So if somebody uses 1 or 2 Juul pods a day, that's 1 to 2 packs of cigarettes a day. That's how much nicotine is in a Juul pod. Okay? Just gonna move on just because of time. There are a lot of adverse effects of vaping. I think we've talked about a lot of them. This is a quick one from the brain down to the rest of the body. We talk about addiction, talk about irritation in the eyes, talk about irritation of the airways, irritation of the heart. For example, nicotine can cause what's called tachycardia, blood pressure to rise, and can cause GI upset as well. And then there's many other side effects. We're just not going to go through them right now. So this is a commonly asked question. Are e-cigarettes safer than cigarettes?
I would say no off the top of my head.
Okay,
I'm
so
just science backing it. Who knows?
yeah, so
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah, I think so. I think both of them are not good at all.
Okay, thank you. You should come and talk with me when I go hear these talks. All right, so the truth is, probably e-cigarettes are safer than nicotine. There's definitely less amount of cancer-causing chemicals in e-cigarettes. However, one is we don't know what the long-term consequences will be, and secondly is that there is likely a long-term risk of these other illnesses developing. But the answer to the question is likely they are less harmful, but that they still have a lot of chemicals that are dangerous, and we know that we're already seeing side effects from these products. All right, let's talk 2 minutes on this concept: addiction, dependence, and the gateway theory. Most of the e-cigarettes have a liquid in the e-liquid have something called nicotine. You guys have heard of nicotine. Nicotine is the highly addictive chemical in all tobacco products, and nicotine is harmful to the body. And we talked about being harmful to the brain. Like you guys talked about, the brain continues to develop until age 25, and this can be markedly impaired by nicotine. There are many pathways in the brain that nicotine affects, but one of the most, and I'm actually going to go to the next slide right here. A couple of things that nicotine can cause that is worrisome to us is decreased impulse control, which means that you lose the ability to control yourself, emotions, for example. Increased risk of mood disorders. What are mood disorders? Things like depression, anxiety. Those are mood disorders, and other psychiatric illnesses, even things like bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, things like that. Attention span can be markedly decreased with chronic nicotine use. Learning ability can be markedly decreased by chronic nicotine use. And then the part that also is scary to us in the medical field is that it can prime the brain for other drugs that, such as marijuana, cocaine, heroin, etc. And this is the part that we get worried about in terms of chronic use of nicotine. This is the last part of the talk, and then I'm gonna open it up for questions. Have you guys heard about the vaping crisis that occurred a few years ago?
No.
Nobody heard about it, really? What grade are you guys in? I should have asked this at the beginning.
7 to 12.
7 to 12. All right. So the 12th graders probably heard about it because they were in high school at the time. The 7th graders may not have heard so much. So about 2 years ago, actually I saw my first case in 2015, but it was like an isolated case of a guy who was using marijuana liquid in his vape pod. But it was very isolated, maybe in other parts of the country like Denver and California was seen. But in 2019, here in New York, especially across the country, we started seeing cases of people who would use black market marijuana in a liquid oil form, not cigarette, not marijuana smoking, but liquid marijuana. And they would put it in their pods, not jewel pods, because you can't put the, it didn't come in like a little jewel pod, but in their vape devices, in their vape pens, and they would inhale it. And because this contained vitamin E, acetate, like vegetable oil, all this, it caused an extensive amount of damage in their lungs. And we're still seeing cases. I saw a case last week. We had a couple of cases. We see several cases every month, just in our own health system here, which is Northwell, or the health system that we're at, Northwell, but there's other health systems and they see a lot of cases. And what happens is that these e-liquids that contain this marijuana oil, and we also saw some cases with Juuls, by the way. But what happened is that e-cigarette or that e-liquid, which contained that marijuana oil, went into the lungs, and it caused like almost like a thermal energy, and also what's called a pneumonitis, like an inflammation of the lungs. You ever heard of pneumonia? Mm-hmm. COVID pneumonia, right? Yeah. So instead of causing an infectious pneumonia, it caused a chemical pneumonia because of all the chemicals that are inside the vape devices. So we saw several cases of lung injury caused by vaping. The patients presented with fevers, cough. Actually, interestingly, they came in presenting with GI symptoms, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, abdominal pain. And then we do, like they would come into the hospital, we do an abdominal scan on them, and then we catch the lung bases, the lower parts of the lung, and we say, what the heck is going on in their lungs? The lungs are whited out with all this crap in them. And so we said, let's get a CAT scan of their chest. So we do a CAT scan, we look at their chest, their CAT scan is whited out. Their entire lungs are filled with this inflammatory process that we had no idea what it was. And we said, what is this? So we all started talking to each other, doing biopsies on patients. They said, this is all lung injury from vaping. Initially, we didn't even know what it was. I'm sure Carol will remember that we didn't know what this was. There have been more than 500 cases across the country. Actually, this is an old PowerPoint. There's more than 2,500 cases across the country as of 2021. This is my old PowerPoint, Carol. Almost 100, more than 100 cases in New York. There's been more than several hundred cases in New York now. And again, there's been much more than 9 deaths. This is from 2 years ago, but I had updated. I'm sorry I didn't give you the updated slides. And like we said, most of them are from vaping marijuana or THC, but we've had several cases related to vaping e-cigarettes such as Juuls, Logic, etc. What's interesting about these cases, because we followed them in the office afterwards, is that even after they've recovered from the lung injury, they never went back to normal in the first few months. They spent several months where they had very severe limitation in their exercise. So for example, I remember one patient would tell me he's young, he was like 20 something. He couldn't go up a flight of stairs for several months after because of how short of breath he would get with doing any little activity. And his breathing test showed significant decline in his lung function, although thank God it improved over time. But a lot of these patients had these limitations for extended periods of time after the illness. So actually this is So here you can see a relatively normal lung, and you can see here in the top one, where this is all supposed to be black or dark. All that is filled with this inflammatory process or pneumonia, which initially, in the very beginning, we thought this was bacterial pneumonia or some type of infection. But after we started seeing case after case with all these black market marijuana, we realized that this was all vaping-induced lung injury. Or you guys may hear a term called EVALI. Have you ever heard of this term called EVALI? E-cigarette or vaping-associated lung injury. All right, I'm going to stop here and open it for questions if that's okay.